Greetings to you. I come to you from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I'm very happy to be here. Before I start, I really want to thank Catchlight, the whole team, who have really, it's been really an amazing experience and a great partnership. And as some of you might know, the Catchlight relationship is not a one-time, it's a lifetime engagement. So I'm quite happy to be part of this family. So today, what I'm gonna try to do, Elodie was earlier on, a few days ago was saying that I had a lot of slides, so I'm gonna try to be as efficient as possible to go through what I want to say. I have a lot to tell you, and also a lot to share in regards to this experience. So I'm gonna try to go through this within my time slot. So for me, I want to go through my history. A lot of people are unaware that I actually am a photojournalist, and I'm sort of one of those rare unicorns that exists between photojournalism and fine art photography. I'm not an elitist when it comes to photography. I believe that every form of photography is valid, which means that I choose how I want to share my stories, and what I'm not able to do within my journalism work, I'm able to do in my fine art. So with that said, I just want to go through just the earlier works that I had, just to give you some information about my background for those of you that are not familiar with me. I was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I left at an early age and lived in different places, but I actually immigrated to Canada, and my photography experience really started in my high school, where I always mention I had a really great art teacher who we asked him about teaching us how to print, and the true love for photography came, and it started from the darkroom. And often in this digital world, I always say the analog is a good teacher for understanding photography fully. So through that experience, I worked for various publications, and even coming back home, I've been in Ethiopia now 12 years in December. It has really been a great inspiration to be back in my country. And I do feel that if I wasn't in Ethiopia, I wouldn't be able to create some of these images that I'm gonna share with you, and even my process to grow from that. So the first time that I came to Ethiopia was in 2000, but then I went back in 2007. And during that time period, I spent about 2 months traveling through different parts of Ethiopia and really trying to understand my country, my culture, the history, and I'm more of a people person, so I always say that I'm not interested in taking photos of animals or landscapes. The thing that fascinates me is really the human interaction. So through this tour, I produced a large collection, which also became a publication. And what I found fascinating in Ethiopia is that the lighting is absolutely amazing, and it's very precise light. I don't know if it's because of the elevation or what have you, but you can just go anywhere and find beauty. And through that, what I was really trying to express was basically document moments that, for example, since I left at a young age, there's a lot of images that are missing of me in my country. So for me, it was in a sense of redeveloping almost like an album of a space and a place that I was not familiar with because my memory of a child was too young. So through this, sorry. All right. So through this experience, and it was really ironic, I was reshuffling my slides, and I always say I'm actually a black and white photographer. I believe in black and white, and to me, I don't know, there's just something about black and white that I find quite fascinating and very precise. And I always say, unless I see color, unless it like slaps me in the face, I can't do color photography. And going through these slides, it's been really interesting because I realized just yesterday that a lot of my color palette and my photojournalism carried over into my fine art, just subconsciously without sort of being aware of it. So a lot of the images that I captured, for example, this is an image in Gondar. I spent a lot of time working on Islam in Ethiopia earlier on. And in Ethiopia, there are many challenges as far as being a photographer, earning the trust of the community, and even trying to find storylines that are quite unique. And this was really an amazing moment. I often get interviewed where people ask me, being a woman, is it challenging for you? What are some of the obstacles that you encounter? And when I was shooting this mosque, I told, I had a meeting again with the imams and so forth, and I had asked them, I just want to shoot the exterior. I'm not trying to get inside because women are not allowed inside. And the really amazing moment was that they allowed me in to take photos. And this is always what I try to teach young photographers, is that there's always obstacles and always challenges, but you have to find a way to overcome them. And really, the limitations are based on your own limitations of what you think you can and cannot do. So anything is possible is my belief. So through my journalistic work, it was really trying to show sort of a unique perspective on Ethiopia. So starting out earlier on, especially growing up in Canada during the famine in Ethiopia, the one thing that always bothered me was that, the stories that I hear about Ethiopia through my mother was completely different from the reality of what I see in the international media. And this is not saying that everything is perfect in Ethiopia, but there's always two sides to any story. So based on that, this was really the key provocation for me of understanding early on the power of the image and how photography is really a tool that transmits so much and can really form perceptions and also really direct perspectives. So from that, I decided that I need to find a way to engage in this. And it took me a while to get to this point, but throughout all of it, it was always trying to find sort of my visual language of being able to tell the stories that I wanted to share, not only with my own community, but with the world. So this image coming up was actually the starting point of my work. I had my career development, I had really amazing mentors, such as Chester Higgins and Dudley Brooks. And also I had a mentor named Harley Little, who was a commercial photographer in a studio. So I assisted him for 3 years. And it was actually through him that I understood lighting and the business side of commercial photography. And at the same time, also, I managed to be able to produce this image, which was really the beginning of my Painted Faces series. So the way that this image came about, I'm a graduate of Howard University School of Communication. When I was at Howard, Howard is known for our homecomings because it's quite intense, and there's a yearly fashion show that takes place. And at that time, the fashion show director had done an open call because they were looking for an image to sort of, the branding image for that fashion show. And so I went to the rehearsals, I found these two models. And what I was really trying to express at that time is because going to a school like Howard, I was an African going in a HBCU school, and there's always this thing of like, how do I bring some elements of Africa into, into the US or into the school? And so I said, well, let me look at these body sort of markings and what have you. And anyways, so this image never made it through for the fashion show branding. The guy thought it was too weird, and he was just like, what is this, But in the end, this became a key image for there was a big show in Smithsonian at the African Art Museum, which was looking at Ethiopian artists living in the diaspora. And at that time, I didn't think much of this work, but when Smithsonian asked, to look at my work, I sent this, and this ended up being in the permanent collection inside the Smithsonian. So moving forward, even after this point, I decided to pursue my film career. So I literally had given up photography. I had sold my lights, everything, and my focus was to enter into my film career. And it wasn't until Bamako Biennale in 2007 when I exhibited my journalistic work, and I had the opportunity to meet Simone Jami, who basically encouraged me to return back to photography. And his whole thing was, Simone is a character who really provokes you and makes you think about the direction that you're going through. So about, I think, 2011 or something like that, there was a project that came up, which was basically looking at the African interpretation of the Divine Comedies, which is Dante's Divine Comedy. So looking at Paradise, Purgatory, and Inferno. So my section was Inferno. And this was a project that took about, I think, 5 years or so. And in the beginning, I was trying to think, okay, what should I produce? So I was like, should I go back to my black and white? Should I do journalistic work? And then to me, in my mind, I was like, well, let me see if I can get back to fine art and to try to continue this face painting style that I had started. And so I was commissioned and I did 7 pieces. And what I was really looking at was, trying to sort of take my own personal journey of being in Ethiopia and how that impacted. So my section was Inferno, and what I was looking for was really how people wear masks, you know, how people pretend to be one thing, but they're actually another within themselves, and how people use sort of, you know, dishonesty in order to get ahead or to attain power. You know, there are different things. And a lot of times, you know, people ask me how I create my work. I start out with a sketch on a notebook, and I plan out each shot. And then I go into the colors, into the outfits. And then, you know, sometimes you can have everything organized and perfect, but when everything is set up, it just could be a crappy shot. So you have to sort of reimagine and continuously move forward within the process. And to me, what I always look for is just that magical moment. So I'm very specific about the pose. I'm very specific about the glance. So if you look at all my images, the way that the women are posed and how they look straight into the camera, these are very specific calculations. And what I believe in is there's a lot of symmetry in my work. I remove shadow, because what I'm interested in is just sort of the it's the flat dimension of the work, and in a sense trying to make almost like a stamp, that it can be very graphical. And even working with specific colors, I only work with primary colors. And this really stems from looking at it as an artist. What I'm really exploring is my infancy in my artwork. So for example, when you're trying to learn painting, you're not gonna jump into acrylic. You know, you're gonna start out with your charcoal and work your way to watercolors and then combining and so forth. So this is the process that I'm going through. So in a sense, in my my creative path, the black and white for me was the charcoal and the sketches. And I've just been developing that over the years and trying to have a very precise voice within that. And through that, what I have experienced is that, and I keep saying this, I'm not creating work for the validation of anybody. I'm actually creating work that there are specific things that I would like to say, and I'm expressing those things through this work. And even for, systematically, the themes that I choose, a lot of it really stems from just looking at women's issues and even my own experience through all of this journey. And even to answer some of the questions in regards to like why the face painting, in my research, what I've found is that, and you know, I repeat it, but I find that traditional cultures, not only in Africa, but globally, it's quite fascinating that traditional cultures have sophistication. You know, there is a rhythm to everything, that there's a spiritual element to it. And through that, what I'm really seeking is how do I bring the past into the future? So through these kind of imagery, even the outfits, how I decide on the clothing, the patterns, specific symbols, it's really pulling initially from my culture and then eventually now going to different parts of the world, but realizing at some point there's a meeting point of different cultures. So when you look at body marcation, tattooing, you know, face painting, at some point certain cultures sort of merge together, even though there is no historical connection. So for example, when we look at you know, indigenous communities in Amazon, and then you look at West Africa, there's certain meeting points, even though there is no historical meeting points. So in a sense, what I'm creating is pulling from the tradition, but also having this sort of a global conversation in really our humanity. So I've done several works. You can see it online. I also work on different projects. So as an example, this is a project that I did for WaterAid. This is a project that I was very passionate about. And when WaterAid came to me, they asked me, you know, we're trying to promote, you know, the issue of water and the scarcity of water in Ethiopia and across the continent. And I said to them, you know, there's a lot of these NGO photos of this issue, and, you know, it's just people are becoming numb to it. And if you're trying to educate, especially those in the West, I said, you know, I would prefer that I work artistically to it. So they were quite open to it, and it was really an amazing project. I went to the Northeast in this place called Dalol, which is like the landscape that you see here is actually the real landscape. The moon, obviously not. But this was really an image that was looking at the impact of the lack of water and menstruation and how that was linked to young girls in school. Because if they didn't have access to water And if, when they got their periods, basically they would stay at home and miss out in school and so forth. So a lot of the symbolism for me was that, the female body, which is the creator of all of us, but that monthly cycle also becomes a hindrance on their future destiny. So a lot of the references, even this black and white carpet, it's an actual carpet that you see, but we readjusted in Photoshop. And the way that I like to build the image is that, we start out with one idea, but in the post-production, that's sort of the final phase of really pulling out different things that, for example, some things that I didn't imagine, that I didn't plan out, also comes out in the post-production before the taking of the photo. So that's just to give you a little snippet of just some of the background in regards to my work. As it relates to Catchlight, the proposal that I had presented was very specific, and it really stemmed from looking at the project. The collection that I built was called Distant Gaze, and this was really to look at archive images of Ethiopian women at the turn of the century. So when you look at the history of photography in Ethiopia, is that initially the first photographers were missionaries that were coming in from Europe, but eventually there was this sort of obsession with taking these portraits of Ethiopian women in the half nude. But as an Ethiopian, you can tell based on the cultural indicators that region, women don't disrobe, they're not running around half naked. So it was really fascinating how the European photographers were taking these women to take photos of them, but then those became postcards that were being sold back to Europe. So there was this sort of fantasy or this erotic thing, and in a sense, it was sort of presenting these women sort of anthropologically as opposed to them being human. And looking through all these archives, and I work a lot with archives, is that when I look at the gaze of the woman and how they look intensely into the frame, it's quite fascinating because there's a specific rage, there's rage, there's anger, but also they present themselves with a specific dignity as well, even though the conditions that they're in, and whatever negotiations that happen, I'm sure there was money exchange and so forth to get their portraits taken. But I've always been fascinated about that look, that gaze. And so to me, when I was building the collection, what I was really looking at is I started addressing the different topics relating to women in Africa. So for example, this is a piece called The Return of a Departure. And what I wanted to express was, in an ironic way, a lot of Africans died through this transatlantic slave trade, and now a lot of Africans are dying through Libya and through the oceans. So in a strange way, the ocean has become sort of our burial ground in a weird way. And so this was really a discussion about the migration of African women, and having traveled in different parts of Africa, it's always been interesting to see that dynamic. And then the other piece that I wanted to share with you, I got it. And again, this is really about, the dignity of women. And again, a lot of my work, the women are clothed in a very specific way. And to me, it's removing sort of the sexuality part of the woman, but really showing the woman in a very dignified way and having sort of a different layer conversation within that. So this was an image that, to me, was really about sort of defining that as women, we are like the divine. So through that, there are certain things that I think as women that we have to encounter daily, and we have to find ways to protect ourselves. So this was the conversation that I was having within this work. Everybody okay? I'm not going too fast, am I? All right. So speaking of Catchlight and the project, I was actually, I rarely apply for, different awards or whatever, grants and so forth. So I was really pleasantly surprised to, first of all, be shortlisted. And, there's been amazing photographers who have submitted, but it was really a great honor to be part of this process. And the key thing that I wanted to propose was that, we're always, in a sense, talking about diversity in photography, and we're always talking about, misrepresentation and all that stuff. And to me, it was, it wasn't just about talking about it. It's not about writing an article about it, but I felt like then we have to go into action. So my proposal was two parts. One was I really wanted to share with the world the amazing history that Africa has. And my main focus was looking at heritage sites, pre-colonial heritage sites, and also to share with the world these sort of amazing contributions that Africa has done for the world, but creating my artwork within these heritage sites. So that was the first component. The second component, what I was looking at was that I'm still a photojournalist, and I still believe that photojournalism is the foundation of photography. And the one key thing, like over the years that I've been teaching, is that building a story, making a collection, you have to be able to tell a story through these different images. So, in the continent, one of the major challenges is that there are a lot of photographers who are focusing on style before technique. So I've had the privilege of working at the Washington Post, where it really taught me the impact of the image, and it really taught me of how to build a story. So what I proposed was that in each place that I was doing my photo shoot, I wanted to also have students that I can give assignments, give lessons, and at the same time also, they see the photojournalistic approach, and then they see the fine art approach by also being part of my team when I create the work. And this was really a way for them to understand the process. Oh, wait, I didn't realize it went to this. So it's okay. So just going back, so within that, photojournalism is quite key, and I've been really pushing this because in the end, a lot of the images that we see online, and even you can do a Google search, still there is this sort of one-sided image of the continent. So when we talk about photography, and why I'm very passionate about supporting emerging talents and even doing my own personal work, is really to try to show, first of all, the complexities of the continent. The second is that when we speak about photography, and I think in the West, we're sort of, we live in a visual aesthetics that has been formulated from an early age. But when you come to the continent, that visual language is the key thing that we have to develop. So in that sense, when we talk about the image has a political impact, economic impact, that has a social impact, which means that it's not just an artistic expression, but there's commercial applications to it. There's historical, there's ways to shift people's ways of thinking when it comes to the continent. And a lot of the images that have come out, especially from foreign photographers, is that it's always been perpetuating this cliche that we've seen. So my whole thing is that, if we develop the capacity of photographers within the continent and we systemize, and again, it goes back to, unless we have institutions, we cannot be part of the international market. And what really lacks in the continent is that there hasn't been a proper focus on building institutions in different points. So from my end, and I say it, I'm not here to save Africa or the world. I'm just here to make my contribution with what I know. And having had amazing mentors, I'm just trying to transfer what was given to me to new students. So within, are you pressing it? Go back. Am I touching it, or is it? Okay. So, sorry. So what I looked at was that within the students, I've been teaching in Ethiopia since I arrived, been doing a lot of workshops and so forth, and running the photo festival and what have you. But I realized that in order to get the photographers sort of to systemize, and I can tell you in Addis Ababa, the biggest challenge in Addis Ababa is to walk on the streets and do street photography, because there's always issues with security, people that have no business calling the police on you. There's always this sense of suspicion, which also comes from our history. But what I wanted the students to focus on was just 3 topics, which was really looking at space, daily life, and culture. So within space, the main focus for me was, a lot of people don't know what African cities look like. So I wanted the students to really focus on architecture and interior spaces, because this was a way for them to also understand lighting, understand composition, and so forth. For daily life, it was really for them to follow stories, because often, you will see, for example, you'll see a tragedy, but there is no story of the back end of what is exactly behind that storyline of the person. So there isn't enough of doing the research and going deeper. And this was really an exercise for the students to challenge them and to present to us stories that we haven't seen before. And even looking at culture, having taught in different parts of the continent, photographers always tend to gravitate towards cultural events. And what I try to provoke them is not to show us culture and what we've already seen, what's already out there, but to show us this contemporary culture, to show us sort of a segment of society that we have not encountered in the media or in any other space. So through this process, it's basically supporting them and getting them to start developing their technique. And again, what I keep saying to them is that, style will come later. But first, you need to experiment. You need to do as many different styles of photography as possible, because that becomes the building block that you draw from. So for me, having had this photojournalistic background, that helped me within my artistic work, because it really one feeds into the other, and I don't see it as a separate entity. Okay. So just to give you some background, so for this project, the countries that I chose was Uganda, Ivory Coast, and Ethiopia. I will continue this project to 2 other regions as well. And the way that I've worked within these projects is that I find a local partner to be able to help me in identifying the talent that I can make a selection from. And through that process, it's also having that local partner also supports me in understanding better, especially some places that I've never been, it's the first time. So, and this is just a way for me of working efficiently, but at the same time, it's also supporting those entities that are doing that work within their countries. So the first, the first country being Uganda, I partnered with the Kampala Biennale. And in this edition of the Kampala Biennale, they had the theme was the artist studio. So they invited different artists from the continent who were going to give lessons to to the artists or photographers or what have you. And it was really this conversation of this exchange that was being created. And then the end results was to be exhibited inside the Kampala Biennale. And through this encounter, this was actually my first time going to Uganda. The selection process that I go through is very precise, and I select photographers, and then basically we go through different lesson plans, and then they have to produce work, and then we do reviews and so forth. So for each, I've listed the names of the different photographers, but I'm just focusing on a couple of the photographers within the list. So for the Kampala Biennale, it was actually photographers that participated from across the continent. So I selected those photographers. But the most interesting one for me was Moira from Madagascar. And her work, we went through different lessons and so forth, and then she was given an assignment for her to share with me her experiences of going back to Madagascar. And she's based in South Africa. And it was quite, it's the most amazing thing when you teach is when photographers actually get it, and you see sort of their minds expanding, and you see the style changing, and them finally getting the rhythm. So she is really one of those photographers who I felt that really she works super hard. And even for the Addis Photo Fest, what I ended up doing is that from the Uganda project, I invited 3 photographers, including Mayora, to be part of our portfolio review. So each edition of the photo festival, which is every 2 years, we have a portfolio review where we select 20 photographers from different parts of the continent who are reviewed by international experts. And I felt by inviting 3 of them to Ethiopia, it was really an opportunity for them to also get another perspective in regards to their work. So for example, there was editors from The Post, from Nat Geo, different curators, and even the way that we have built the portfolio review is to get a perspective, because sometimes you review the work of a photographer, and sometimes some photographers are not meant to be photojournalists, or they're not meant to be fine art photographers, but it's just catching them earlier on in their career to be able to guide them and give them a sense of direction. So in this edition of the festival, we actually give an award, and she was actually the first prize winner. So it was interesting to see the progression of her work, and to also for her to gain confidence in what her visual storytelling sort of language is. So during the course of the portfolio review, I told the reviewers to give the assignment of those 3 topics that I mentioned, and this is what she came back with. And what I found this super interesting is that as an Ethiopian, this is something that we see every day. So we have these small stores that sell fresh coffee. They actually roast it and so forth. And she just did a complete series in regards to this, which was this looking at the culture. So she's definitely a thinking photographer, and she has an amazing visual language. And it's been interesting to see her through this process. And this was a way for me, whenever I have an opportunity, and the advantage that I have is running the festival, it's also an opportunity to invite different photographers and to continue the dialogue after I have had the initial contact with them. Okay, so the location that I chose was a place called Niero in Uganda. And in each location, I take all the students with me and we do like a road trip. And through a road trip, it's an opportunity to also get to know each other better. And for a lot of the photographers, when we travel, for a majority of them, it's their first time actually traveling to these different places. So I'm discovering it just as they're discovering it. But throughout the course of the journey, it's really for them to also know their history and their heritage. So in Niero, what we found was these rock paintings, which I found quite fascinating. And so I decided that, we would do my creative shooting within that space. And, we over the few times, the key thing is that I want the students to be engaged in the whole process. So through this, they learn studio lighting, they understand, finding these moments, understanding even negotiation with certain locations, because a lot of the times we need to get permission and letters, and there's a whole process that we have to go through. But this is just to show them the different processes that you have to encounter as a photographer. And everything at the end as a photographer is really based on negotiating and really, not entering any situation with an ego, but entering a situation to actually be able to, elaborate and explain yourself. So in this space, and these are just the raw images that I'm sharing with you. I haven't processed them, but just to give you sort of the behind the scene of what we were creating. And it was, in each location, there's really an amazing, looking at these heritage spaces, it kind of gives you sort of a different energy for me. So after we have done these locations, we also went back to Kampala. And again, this was sort of an exercise for the students of how sometimes you have to create within the space. So, as I mentioned, you have your shots planned out and so forth, but then the magic moment of like having to invent something on the spot, you have to be like quick on your feet. So this was like a large warehouse space. We painted the wall. And to give you some references, the clothing that she's wearing is actually like an interpretation of a traditional wear that women wear in Uganda. So again, it's pulling from these traditional elements. But anyways, we went through that whole process, and to them, it was just, it was an interesting experience of just how I think and how I process. And this is the crew from Uganda, so every section. So, and I work with the same team, so we travel to different places. So it's been really an amazing experience. And in each location also, I'm utilizing local fashion designers, and I'm also using models that I pick. So, and even in my model selection, like the reason I absolutely loved her is that she walked in, because we did like a model call. She walked in, and just how she sat, I was like, all right, that's the chick that I want, because my work is not this sissy modeling stuff. You have to be tough to handle it. So if you're not strong, don't work with me. So ironically, all the personalities of my models, in a strange way, is very similar personalities. And the one question that I'm tired of answering is that you in the photo? And I'm like, I'm not that narcissistic to take photos of myself. But anyways, So the next stop for me was Ivory Coast in Abidjan. I had exhibited my work there in this gallery called Dynaway Foundation. And the amazing thing is that there was, I think, over 40 photographers that applied for my workshop. So whenever I travel, especially in Africa, I'm not so interested in just exhibiting my work. Like, I would rather teach and make some kind of contribution, because exhibiting it, doing the cocktail or whatever, that kind of gets tired after a while. So for me, it's like, if I'm gonna make a point to fly all the way to somewhere, like, I want to know who the photographers are. I want to understand what, not only the challenges, but who is the talent there that I need to find a way to support. And it's also an opportunity for me for the Addis Photo Fest to really scout out photographers that are not in the market at all. So I made a selection from 40 to 12, and then from 12, this was my final choice. And really, I think that the students in Ivory Coast have been quite amazing. And I remember the first few days, I think we started at like 2 and we're not done till like 10 p.m. And I remember by the second day, I'm like, man, I don't remember like lecturing for this long because it was just super exhausting. And then I realized, oh, it's because everything is being translated, so it's like double time, to get through one lesson. But the students fully understood, and it was, they were quite eager. And the two photographers that I would like to mention to you. So basically, when I arrived in the first round, they had to come back with images, and then the second round, they had to propose a project that they were working on. So for example, Alex Mack, this was the youngest photographer in the group. And when I initially saw his submission, it wasn't anything super interesting, but I was like, maybe this guy has something that we need to look at. So basically focused on trying to figure out how he was gonna continue on. And the unfortunate thing is that he came up to me, I think, in the last visit, and he was like, Aida, I don't have a camera, and I don't know if I can do this project or if I can continue. And I said, listen, man, we all started with no camera, so you need to figure out how you're gonna get that camera, because I'm not gonna give you a camera, So I was like, if you got to rent it, borrow it, whatever it is, we all go on that path. So anyways, he decided, okay, I'm gonna find a way. And then he had a big issue with trying to find a proposal that he was gonna give to me. So I don't know, randomly I said, well, I Googled fencing in Abidjan. So for me, I said to him, okay, well, why don't you do a piece on fencing in your country? And, I'm always fascinated about these different things that most people don't expect from the continent. And he really came back, in my opinion, with very strong images. And I don't know how he found these kids. I don't know, exactly how that negotiation happened, but it's exciting when you see this kind of work, when you see the photographer really going above and beyond and really pushing himself and really trying to sort of tell a story. So this was like super fascinating to me, and it's really, young photographers like this that you say, okay, now we're starting and we have a lot of work ahead. And the students in Abidjan, they know, I'm always pushing them, saying that and even across the continent, I said to them, I'm not interested in you being the best in your country. What I'm interested in is you being the best in the world. And that's where we have to function, because it's easy to be the best in your town, But when you compete in the international world, this is where you understand where you stand. So the next photographer that I liked very much was Olivier. Olivier is like a super tall guy, very jovial, and he's really the leader of the team. So when I first came across his work, he only submitted 2 photos, but the crappiest 2 photos you can possibly imagine. So, but the 2 photos, they were just the cliche worst photos ever. But I was like, okay, this guy has lighting skills, so if he's at least has lighting skills, so let's figure out. And in my mind, I'm like, I bet this guy's a commercial photographer or a studio photographer. Like, that's what was running through my head. So I selected him, and in the first day, they had to present their works that they had submitted. And he was trying to like philosophize about these 2 works. I'm like, man, just sit down. There's no philosophy to your work. Let's start building from here. So his first submission was really looking at, I don't know if you know, like we have, across Africa, there's these small stores or like these souks. So he basically just went to this space, photographed this guy. And one thing I understood is that he really has a talent for approaching people. People trust him right away. Huge guy, but he can find his way to navigate through. And he's a very commercial guy, he does very commercial photography. But I tell him, listen, first show me that you can tell a story. And then after that, we move on to the next thing. So his second storyline that he proposed to me was really looking at this ballet dancer in Abidjan. And again, this is an exercise for all of them, because it's really an opportunity for them to understand people, understand moments, understand the technical aspects of their work, and also the challenges that they face while they're trying to document a specific storyline. But when they come back with interesting work, then I'm at a stage now that now I want to give them more assignments in order for them to come back with stories that I'm curious to know about their country and the regions that they come from. Okay, so for the project for Abidjan, I decided to look at a place called Sorobango, which is in the northeast of Ivory Coast, which is close to the Ghanaian border. And what I was interested in was, again, pre-colonial architecture, but I was looking at these traditional mosques, which are quite amazing and very beautiful structures. And initially, we went to the Ministry of Culture, and then we drove like 8 hours to go to this site. But we realized when we arrived there that we had to still talk to the imams in order to get permission to shoot in the location. And again, being a woman, having a female model, I said to them, look, I don't want any problems. Like, I need to have complete access to the space. They're like, no problem. I'm like, I'm painting bodies, so I don't want you to freak out when you see the painted bodies or whatever. And these were like the nicest people possible, very understanding, completely gave us freedom to do whatever we wanted to do in that space. And this architecture is quite, it's amazing, the interior, and there's certain elements to it that I find quite fascinating. And this is an image where we did several images around the mosque. So this is just a sample of the rooftop. So for example, we did several variations of this, but that space, you can do a lot with it, and you come back with just amazing photos. And this is the team. So I think we look like the heat was crazy. So coming to my homeland of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, I've taught many times in Ethiopia, and I'm proud to say of a lot of the photographers that have come about from just the different workshops and also the photo festival, and to just see the level of photography growing in the country. So as an example, in the first Addis Photo Fest in 2010, I think we only exhibited like 4 photographers from Ethiopia. And in the last edition, we exhibited around 34, 35. So the number has increased, and the variety of photography is also increasing, which I find to be very encouraging. So for this round of the Ethiopia, we did an open call, made a selection of photographers. But for me, I prioritized the photographers that had already gone through the Addis Photo Fest round, and to sort of continue on after the festival with them. So the portfolios that I wanted to share with you is Abel Gashau. So Abel, in the middle of our chaotic and nightmarish festival, came up to me and he was like, yeah, I realized that you're only showcasing 2 of my photos, and I submitted like 10. And I said, listen, man, you're lucky I'm even showing 2. I could just remove the 2 as well. So I said to him, if you want to learn, then you should come back right after the photo festival and be part of like whatever teaching that we were doing, if you really want to understand how you need to develop your visual language. So he's really one of those dedicated guys that really pushed forward. And what I did with the students is that we did the space, daily life, culture, we did it in the city of Aksum. And Aksum is the northern region of Ethiopia. It's also one of the oldest empires, called the Aksumite Empire. And I wanted them to get into, the comfort of getting familiar with a community that, most of them have never been to Aksum. So through that process, I told them that, within photography is that, 1% is really pressing that button. 99% is your human interaction, especially if you're dealing with people. So I always say to them, people can see fear in you, and I can see fear in your photo. So you have to find a way to be comfortable, and you need to find a way to be invisible within the spaces that you exist in. So with them, it was really for them to find different ways. We did a few photo walks, and they focused on different thematics and what have you. And then finally, for Abel's project, what he submitted was looking at there's a group of young people that on a yearly basis walk all the way to Adwa, which was the battlefield of when the Italians came during World War I. So these young people walk for days. It takes about 43 days for them to walk, so he walked with them. And it was really documenting this process. And this hasn't really been done in a proper journalistic way, and I think there's more to do with it. But it was just a symbolic gesture of remembering our history. And as the only nation in Africa that is independent and never colonized, for us, this is something that is also celebrated, within a national holiday. And these young people are part of that process of to actually go through the different steps of what the soldiers went through. And the amazing thing is that they did it in 43 days. The soldiers back in the day did it in like 22 days. So they were running, half the time. And if you ever come to Ethiopia, the landscape is very mountainous. It's not like flat lands. So it's quite a difficult terrain to navigate through. So this was his collection. Oh. So you can kind of see the landscape is pretty intense. Okay, and then the other photographer that I wanted to speak about is Addis Amero. So Addis started out as a biologist. She spent 3 years working for a company, and over the course of time, she would always come to the office saying, I want to be a photographer, I want to work for you, I want to learn as much as possible. And I said, if you're trying to be rich, don't try to be a photographer, it takes a lot of pain and suffering. But if you want to learn about how to tell a story, then I'm more than happy, but you have to meet me halfway. So eventually she quit her job and started working with me, and she was really an instrumental part of the Addis Photo Fest, which, it's always intense, and I always say, if you survive the Photo Fest, then you're a true soldier. So she was definitely one of those soldiers. So again, with Addis, having spent some time with her, I could never get her to I could never crack into her. It was like a year and a half just pounding at her and trying to make her understand, sort of what a visual language is. And the interesting thing about her history is that her grandfather was a photographer. So even in the Addis Photo Fest, we exhibited, her grandfather's studio work, which was super fascinating, and then portraits of her grandfather, sort of that relationship. So to her, photography was already in her blood. This was something that she was already passionate about. So for her, it was important that she succeeded in this. So my main thing was to keep pushing her to get to a specific point. So, okay, I love this image. So one assignment that I gave her was why don't you look at female boxers? Again, just out of my own curiosity, are there such a thing as female boxers in Ethiopia? So she went in and somehow found a group of female boxers that were being taught by a boxer who was also having them enter into competitions. And she even found her character, this 16-year-old boxer who was so passionate about boxing that she used to hide from her dad and go and train, and then her dad would find out, and there'd be trouble in the family. And then eventually her family had to accept her passion to be a boxer. So she comes from a very humble sort of family, but the way that Addis has been working on this story, she really found a way to get inside and earn the trust of the family, earn the trust of this girl. And this is something that Addis has to continue developing this storyline. And so what Addis has decided now is that she's going to focus on different sports and how females are engaged in these sports, and then eventually to build a larger collection. Because a lot of times when you even look at sports photography, there isn't enough coming out of the continent. But as an example, in Ethiopia we have a huge martial arts culture, but most people don't know that exists. So through her work, to me, this is also a way to share with the world sort of another side through sort of the vision of a young photographer. And as it relates to the location, what I chose was a place called Yeha, which is again in the northern region of Ethiopia. And Yeha is quite interesting because this site that I chose was really, this is almost like Queen Sheba's temple. So this structure is about 2,000 years old. It's the oldest structure that we have in Ethiopia, and it predates Christianity. So when Christianity came to Ethiopia, it was really, they shifted this temple into using it for Christian ceremonies and so forth. But I've always been fascinated. I myself haven't physically been there, so we went with the students, and even this space, it's quite fascinating of the amount of history that is in just that square sort of structure. And I wanted to create my artwork within that space because, again, the start of our empire is really Queen Sheba and King Solomon. When that came together, then that became the beginning of the Ethiopian empire. So there's always this conversation with the Yemenis because they believe that Sheba is theirs, but we think she's ours. So there's always this going back and forth within that. But within this space, what I'm excited about is the post-production and to see what will be the next phase of what I'm gonna come up with. And even, again, looking at the structure and the space and so forth. So through all of this, it's really been not only an education for the students, but an education for me, because I'm also exploring history in all these different places that I wouldn't have had the opportunity without the support of Catchlight. So it's been quite fulfilling, and I'm very grateful. I'm getting the 5 minutes warning. And this is the crew from, so anyway, so this is everybody from the Ethiopia side, and I'm looking forward to continuing this. And the next steps for us is really about continuing on with the photographers. So I'll continue with them for the next, I think, 8 months. And eventually we're planning on really doing an exhibition, a tour, and also producing a book. So we're quite excited with the future of not only this project, but also at the students and where they're gonna end up with. So thank you very much.